After a young priest arrives on an isolated island, supernatural events, incredible miracles, and frightening omens begin to occur. And it turns out that all of this is caused by the blood of an angel, which turns people who drink it into demons. Riley Flynn looks in horror at the girl hit by his car. The man realizes he is guilty because he was drunk, but there is nothing he can do about it. Later, the man freely admits his guilt and goes to prison, where every night before going to sleep he sees the girl he killed. 4 years have passed. Riley's mother, Annie, eagerly awaits her son's arrival in his homeland, a fishing village on Crockett Island off the coast of Washington state, and raises her youngest son, Warren, forbidding him to go to the peat bogs. But the boy wouldn't listen to her lecturing, and having met his friends, he goes to the forbidden place, because no one will prevent the young people there from trying illegal substances and having a great time. They buy the stuff from a local dealer and go to the peat bogs. On the way, the guys stop at a house where Lisa lives. The girl cannot walk. She refuses the offered treat, and the trio goes on their way. At this time, a young man with a huge box locked with padlocks enters the door of the local priest's house. The boys get into a boat and make their way to the far shore of the island. It's already dark, so when they hear a sound of huge wings, the boys mistake them for a giant heron taking off. The peat bogs are also teeming with stray cats that were brought here from the mainland, and they feed on old remains because up until the 1920s people buried their dead right in the yards. And now, when the peat bogs get flooded, those remains resurface. Warren knows this because after storms, all this creepiness washes ashore where their house stands. The boys settle in their usual spot, and after taking some revelatory substances, start telling tales about local ghosts. At that moment, loud cat cries are heard from the bushes, and Warren, shining his flashlight in that direction, sees two burning eyes following them. But they immediately disappear, and the boy forgets about the incident. In the morning, Riley arrives on the island. Annie meets her son and apologizes for his father and younger brother, who could not meet him because they were out fishing. Meanwhile, the ferry is met by a zealous parishioner, Bev Keane, who is concerned about the long absence of Father Pruitt, but the priest is not on the ferry. Meanwhile, teacher Erin Grin undergoes an ultrasound examination of the unborn child, and the doctor assures her that there is nothing wrong with the baby. The women pay attention to Riley, from which they are distracted by the appearance of the doctor's elderly mother, who suffers from dementia. Annie introduces her son to the new sheriff, and the latter greets the boy. The sheriff then wakes up the only detainee, local alcoholic Joe, who came running in the night screaming that a huge albatross was chasing him. The sheriff releases sobered-up Joe, and he walks out to his dog, who has been waiting for his master at the exit all night. Bev, who is passing by, is indignant. The dog is dangerous, it could attack, but they don't listen to her. Meanwhile, Riley and Annie reach their house. The woman shares her problems. There has been an oil spill accident, and now fishermen can only catch fish according to their quota. Naturally, this causes money problems. Previously, hundreds of families lived on the island, but now there are only dozens left. In the meantime, there is a meeting at the school because a storm is coming to the island very soon, and it is necessary to make sure the shelter is ready. The new sheriff calls for it to be equipped in the school, but Bev objects. Everything has been ready in the church for a long time, and there is no need to change anything. All members of the Flynn family finally get together for dinner. Riley informs them that he has to travel to the mainland to check in with the Alcoholics Anonymous, which is one of the conditions for his release. Warren talks about the new teacher, a daughter of an ex. Riley perks up. Is Erin really back on the island? And learns of her pregnancy. Annie announces that their old priest, Father Pruitt, has made the trip to the Holy Land, despite his age-related problems. Warren serves as an altar boy and is aware of the pastor's forgetfulness. Riley disappoints his parents. He has no intention of going to church, which incurs the wrath of his father, a devout Catholic. Meanwhile, Bev notices a light in the windows of Pruitt's house and, upon entering, stares in surprise at the man who meets her. And in the shoreline thickets, attacks on the cats begin to occur. Before going to bed, the father tells Riley that after what happened to him, Annie goes to church every day and prays for him. He asks the boy to at least sit in the pew, for it is very important to his mother. At this time, the new sheriff and his son perform namaz before going to bed. The doctor catches the mother trying to climb to the second floor, and Riley sees Warren climb out the window to go to his friends. At night, Riley as usual sees recurrent dreams of the dead girl and of himself sitting in the boat. The dawn is breaking. The altar workers are preparing for the upcoming church service and notice that the wine bowls are already full. The congregation takes their seats. Bev opens the service, people sing hymns, while the new priest enters the room. Paul Hill has been sent to replace Father Pruitt, who has left and is hospitalized on the mainland. Paul conducts the service and administers communion to the faithful, except for Riley, who has refused to do so. The new priest calls all the parishioners by name, explaining this by Pruitt's stories. Riley decides to accompany Aaron, and the young people reminisce about their past encounters and talk about their experiences. They both vowed not to go back, but nevertheless they are on the island again. Riley lost everything after the accident, and Erin is separated from her husband. The man admits that he read all about different religions while he was in prison because he hoped to find God, but ended up being an atheist. And here he is of no use to anyone and doesn't know how to move on. In the evening, the storm comes to the island, and Riley sees what looks like Father Pruitt walking along the beach. But when he goes out to look, he finds no one. And in the morning, people find hundreds of dead cats on the beach. The citizens cannot determine the cause of death of these animals, although the sheriff suggests some kind of disease, until he discovers that there is not a drop of blood in their bodies. Riley admits to seeing Monsignor Pruitt at night, but nobody believes him. Later, the man travels to the mainland, while Father Paul holds a service. But the church is almost empty. Of the regular parishioners, there's only Lisa, the mayor's paralyzed daughter. The priest gives her communion, then walks her home, and learns that the girl's mutilation is the result of an accidental shooting by drunk Joe. In the meantime, Erin catches Bev in the storeroom, from where the woman takes a box of poison, intending to poison the rats, which have become too numerous. And Father Paul comes to Dr. Sarah's house to administer communion to her sick mother. The elderly woman calls him by the name of Pruitt, which her daughter believes is a symptom of the developing dementia. Back on the island, Riley speaks to Erin. It becomes clear that the two were romantically involved in their early youth. And Annie suddenly notices that her eyesight has improved considerably. In the morning, Father Paul meets his flock at Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Easter Lent. He gives an inspiring speech about the rebirth of the island and the first disciples of Christ, the fishermen. And he reminds them, man must remember that he is dust, and to dust he shall return. After the blessing, the residents gather for the feast. Riley speaks to the priest and again recalls Father Pruitt. He is convinced his eyes did not betray him that night. It was Father Pruitt. Father Paul suggests starting an Alcoholics Anonymous group on the island so that Riley doesn't have to travel so far, especially since there are others here suffering from this evil. The fun is interrupted by an unpleasant incident. Joe's dog dies after eating food off the ground. A new morning arrives. Riley goes out fishing with his father because the father has a bad back. Meanwhile, the sheriff goes to the school pantry, where Bev confesses that she left poison in some parts of the island and the dog really could have died from it. But it was unintentional, and anyone could have taken the poison. In the evening, Riley visits Father Paul and reveals that Bev has extorted donations for the church from the parishioners after convincing them to accept an agreement with the oil company that poisoned the waters of the bay and to receive generous compensation. And it's the same story everywhere else in the world. Villages are getting poorer and churches are getting more luxurious. The father reminds Riley that he was once a believer. And the boy expresses his contempt for the doctrine of good deity because the idea that suffering leads to purification is appalling. At night, Erin sees a mysterious creature near her house and noticing the bloody discharge rushes to the doctor. But Sarah reassures the woman there is nothing wrong with her baby. Later, she has to convince the frightened mother that she just imagined a face in the window. Meanwhile, the dealer passing by an empty house hears strange noises inside. He walks through the door and is attacked. It is morning, and Father Paul, for some reason, takes a particularly close look at Lisa. Then he insists that the girl get up from her chair and come up for communion. And to everyone's shock, Lisa gets up and walks up to the priest. At night, Father Paul enters the confessional and tells himself that he is lying to the parishioners. After all, Father Pruitt was sicker than they thought. And having gone to the Holy Land, the man often fell behind the group. But the parishioners don't need to know that. They will believe that their shepherd is being healed on the mainland and will soon return to the island to witness the miracles that are happening. For after Lisa's recovery, which is perceived by the residents as a miracle, a religious revival begins on Crockett Island. Except that Father Paul himself becomes sick and vomits blood after the accomplishment, which Bev sees. And then the woman notices a newspaper clipping with Father Pruitt's portrait hanging on the wall of the priest's house. The doctor examines Lisa and cannot understand the miracle that has occurred, but her parents strongly oppose her examination on the mainland. And later, the woman finds her mother on the second floor of the house, to which she climbed on her own, although she has not been able to walk for a long time. Meanwhile, suffering people begin to converge on the church, which pleases Bev immensely, but displeases Father Paul. He doesn't need the publicity, especially since many, including Riley, think it's a misdiagnosis by doctors. But that same evening, a miracle happens to his father. The man suddenly stops having back pain and even asks his wife to dance. At this time, Lisa summons Warren and the couple runs off to have fun, and Riley goes to Erin. More and more parishioners come to the morning mass. And one day, Warren catches Father Paul pouring some kind of liquid into the wine, and during the sermon, the priest suddenly collapses without feeling. The story shifts to the time of Father Paul's confession, in which he tells the true story of Monsignor Pruitt. After a visit to Jerusalem near Damascus, he was caught in a sandstorm and took refuge in ancient ruins. This is where Father Paul comes to his senses. He is examined by Sarah, though the man is against any intervention. Meanwhile, the sheriff finds a Bible in his son Ali's possession. And Lisa visits Joe and confesses that she hated him for years for stealing her future, but eventually forgives him. That same day, at the school assembly, the sheriff tries unsuccessfully to convince Bev to stop handing out the Bibles to public school students. Later, Erin confesses that she's intimidated by Bev's confidence in her rightness, and Riley shares with her Father Paul's assignment to write penitential letters to loved ones. That same evening, Sarah's mother begins to speak quite sensibly, much to the doctor's surprise. And touched by Lisa's forgiveness, Joe decides to attend the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with Riley and Father Paul because he intends to change his life. The men go home, and Joe confesses that he recently buried his sister on the mainland. That same evening, Ali asks for his father's permission to attend the mass. The kid is interested in everything that happens in the church. But the sheriff is against it. They are Muslims. Ali reminds him it's his father's decision, not his. But the father recalls how his dying wife praised Allah until the very last moment. God cannot decide who gets a miracle and who does not. The sheriff turns off the light and jumps away from the window because behind it is a pale face, but the next moment there is nothing. In the meantime, Father Paul collapses in front of Bev and the congregation and dies coughing up blood. The action carries over to the moment when Pruitt takes refuge in the dark cave. He burns matches, trying to make out the room where he is trapped, and suddenly sees two burning eyes. Then he is attacked by a nightmarish creature that sucks his blood and drinks his own blood in return. The priest concludes that it is an angel because when he wakes up in the morning, Pruitt finds that he is young again. So he decided to take his savior with him. He rode ahead, waiting for the angel to catch up with him. And he was very much afraid that the angel would disappear. Here on the island, he hid it from everyone and lied to the parishioners because he was Father Pruitt. The next moment, the priest comes back to life. During a scheduled checkup, the doctor informs Erin that her uterus is empty. It was probably a miscarriage. The woman is shocked. How could she not have noticed it at such a late stage? Meanwhile, Bev cancels the mass, and her assistant notices the incredible resemblance between Father Paul and Monsignor Pruitt. She is convinced of the miracle, and the others are simply frightened. Bev enters the priest's room and discovers that he cannot stand the light. It is also as if he can feel God inside him. Bev persuades him to manifest the miracle to his new apostles. Riley notices an improvement in his father's well-being, and the father confesses his unjust anger towards his son and asks for forgiveness for his omissions. Meanwhile, Sarah is collecting Erin's tests when her mother enters the office. She answers her daughter's questions confidently and looks much better than before. And then Sarah sees the blood in the test tube begin to boil in the sun and burn to the ground. In the meantime, distraught, Erin spends the day with Riley, mourning her unborn child and discussing their childhood. She resents her mother, who was a real dictator and never loved her daughter. And then she managed to marry her mother's mental double, which only her pregnancy saved her from. She just packed up and left. Then Riley recounts his dream. At this time, Father Paul is reciting prayers, which makes him sick, and then he notices the mark of the cross on his hand. He cuts his hand and drinks his blood. Joe tries to talk himself out of buying alcohol, and he succeeds with great difficulty. At night, Father Paul holds an evening communion at the house of the doctor's elderly mother, Mildred, who recognizes him as Monsignor Pruitt. Meanwhile, Riley and Erin talk about their ideas of the afterlife and the basics of religion, after which they feel better. That same evening, Joe stops by Father Paul's house and witnesses Father Paul drinking communion wine. Joe looks at the portrait of Pruitt on the wall. Father Paul looks very much like him. The priest embraces Joe, who pulls away, falls, and smashes his head. Seeing the blood, the priest loses his mind and takes to drinking it. In the morning, Riley explains that his dream has changed. Erin has appeared in it, and the woman is sent to the mainland to another doctor. Meanwhile, Bev discovers Joe's dead body and exhausted Father Paul. She asks the mayor's wife to sing hymns, and she herself orders a couple of parishioners to dispose of the corpse. Bev believes that the priest's actions are justified and that his resurrection is a foreshadowing of Christ's second coming. At this time, Erin hears an expert opinion of the doctor, who doubts that the pregnancy was real. By evening, Father Paul feels good again. He holds an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting, explaining Joe's absence by his trip to see his sister. But Riley knows that this is not true and leaves the meeting confused. When he arrives home, he tells his mother about the priest's lies. At night, Father Paul is visited by Angel, who begins to fill the goblet with his blood, while Riley, determined to deal with it, returns to the recreation center. He opens the doors and is attacked by Angel. In the morning, Sarah's mother impresses her daughter with her blooming appearance, and the sheriff is approached by the mother of the missing dealer, who asks him to track down her son. Meanwhile, the parishioners are informed that the mass has been postponed until midnight due to Father Paul's illness, and the startled people view Mildred, who is considerably younger. Erin, concerned about Riley's sudden disappearance, files a missing persons report with the sheriff, but the latter suggests that Riley may have gone on a binge or committed suicide. At Good Friday Mass, Father Paul delivers a sermon replete with militaristic rhetoric, urging the congregation to prepare for war as soldiers in the Lord's army. This sermon upsets Mildred, who forbids her daughter to attend the church any further. At night, Erin is visited by Riley, who asks her to go on a boat with him. The woman agrees, even though she suspects something is amiss. After sailing far from the island, Riley recounts what has happened to him. After Angel's attack, he quickly recovered under Father Paul's care. When Riley tried to go outside, he was burnt and was forced to return and listen to the revelations of Father Paul. The priest is convinced that the angel's blood is a gift from God, and he mixes it into his communion wine to cure the people of Crockett Island of all illnesses. The priest also admitted that he had killed Joe, but according to him, the murder was justified. He also believes that the vampirism traits they both display are the grace of God, which Bev fully agrees with. Father Paul demonstrated to the boy his desire for blood as food, but reassured him that this would soon pass. Nevertheless, Riley is not ready to acknowledge what has happened as divine providence, while the priest reminds him of the fear of all who have seen miracles. Meanwhile, Bev brings Riley the goblet of the congregation's blood, and he drinks it. The priest releases Riley without listening to Bev's objections, for the man's rebirth is complete. Outside, Riley notices how his perception has changed. The colors are brighter and the air more saturated. And he witnesses a conversation between Mildred and his daughter. He visits his sleeping family before heading over to Erin's. Then they head out to sea, where he has nowhere to go. Riley confesses his love for Erin and asks the woman to flee the island. She reciprocates, but at this moment the dawn breaks. Riley sees in the boat the girl he killed in the accident. She smiles and takes his hand. Riley ignites and burns, turning to ash, and Erin screams in terror. The relatives find Riley's letters, while Erin returns to the island and tells Sarah about what is happening in the city. The doctor shows how her blood samples are vaporized by the sunlight and shows rejuvenated Mildred. At this time, Paul confesses to Bev that he senses Riley's death. But the woman reassures him that the boy, having received a great gift, has chosen his own path. She reminds him of Judah, who is also part of God's plan. Sarah shares with Erin and Mildred her theory that Father Paul is spreading a miracle-creating virus through communion wine. This would also explain the missing pregnancy. After all, it is a foreign element in the body, which the virus has decided to deal with dramatically. At this time, Ben brings his son's letters to Father Paul. He senses that something bad has happened. One of the letters is addressed to his father, and Ben asks him to give it to the Monsignor. After Ben leaves, Paul opens the letter and receives a quote, a reminder that they are all ashes, and to dust they shall return. And Erin tries to tell Annie about Riley's death, but the angry woman throws her out, not wanting to believe the terrible news. Sarah informs the sheriff of her suspicions about what is happening in the church, but he refuses to take any action, not wanting to further aggravate relations with the locals, especially since he has already encountered unfair and prejudicial treatment. Erin, Sarah, and Mildred decide to move to the mainland, but find that the mayor has sent the ferries away for repairs, and the fishing boats are almost all in need of repairs. During the night, the power and mobile network go out, which are also shut down by Bev's handmaidens. Erin decides to go to the mass to see the danger for herself. Meanwhile, the sheriff allows his son to attend the midnight mass, and he asks his father to go with him. Before the mass begins, the townspeople make a procession around the island with candles and hymn singing. The service begins with Father Paul confessing to a lie. Then he confesses that he is Monsignor Pruitt. And today is the beginning of a new era for all of them, because holy blood flows in their veins. He calls a parishioner and asks him to drink poison, to die and be reborn. The man drinks it and drops dead. When some people see this, they rush to the exit, but the angel in shining garb stands in the doorway. The creature reaches the dais and spreads his wings to the astonished gaps of the people. And then the dead man comes to life and gets to his feet. Bev and her assistants bring out cups of poison and hand them out to everyone present. The sheriff tries to take Ali away, but the boy pulls out his hand. He wants to stay with God. That is when the policeman pulls out his gun, but the congregation rushes at him and throws him to the floor. The boy, in spite of his father's screams, drinks the poison. Lisa's parents do the same, but the girl refuses. Unimaginable things are happening all around. Some are drinking the poison, the others are pushing the cups away. Then Mildred raises the sheriff's gun and shoots Father Paul in the head. A vampire attacks her and carries her away in his claws from the church. Bev orders the doors to be locked. Meanwhile, Ali comes back to life. The dead parishioners are resurrected as vampires, and hungry attack those who have not drunk the poison. All hell breaks loose with screams and blood everywhere. Ed turns into a vampire, and Sheriff, Erin, Lisa, Sarah, Warren, and Annie flee. But Bev gets in their way. Erin shoots her, after which the group escapes. Father Paul regains consciousness, while resurrected Bev and her assistants send vampires to attack the townspeople who are not present at the church. After the parishioners turned vampires have left the church, Father Paul is resurrected, and disappointed by the outcome of the mass, removes his robes and remains sitting alone on the steps of the altar of the bloody church, looking at Mildred, who has also turned. Screams can be heard in the town. The vampires are killing their loved ones and converting them. Meanwhile, the group of the runaways hide out in Erin's house, pondering over a future plan of action. Warren recalls his canoe, which is hidden on the outskirts of the island, and Erin realizes that the vampires needed the boats for something. She becomes terrified at the thought that some of the monsters might make it to the mainland. Suddenly, a burning bottle flies in through the window, setting the house on fire. It is Bev. She wants to settle the score with Erin, who shot her. To allow the group to escape, Annie distracts the attackers by exposing Bev's motives. She's just jealous that God loves everyone without singling her out. Bev, who is always so right and so good, must be furious. Then Annie commits suicide by seducing the vampires with her blood. Meanwhile, John Pruitt recalls his affair with Mildred, which resulted in the birth of Sarah, who was forced to live with her fake father, as such circumstances were unacceptable for the pastor. The priest admits that the main reason for bringing Angel to the island was his desire to cure Mildred and live in peace with her and his daughter as a full family. The survivors decide to split up. The adults go to burn the boats prepared by the vampires to leave for the mainland to spread vampirism, while Lisa and Warren flee toward the peat bogs, where the younger Flint's canoe is stored. Along the way, they encounter other vampires more than once, attacking innocent people who have not attended the midnight mass. Drunk on blood, Bev proposes not to extinguish the house, but instead to burn every building on the island, following the biblical story of the end of the world and the Ark, which will be the building of the rehabilitation center. She and her assistant go to burn the city, unaware that some converts who have not lost their reason and morals refuse to kill. Among them are Riley's parents, who find each other in the middle of the night. The sheriff, Erin, and Sarah, meanwhile, set fire to the boats. and Lisa and Warren hide in an abandoned house, unaware that they have entered the lair of the beast. The girl lights a match and sees the angel drinking blood of the man dragged into the house. Lisa shoots the monster, but he's so engrossed in what he's doing that he doesn't even notice them. Then Lisa douses the room with fuel, and walking out the door, they set fire to the house, but the angel breaks free and flies off into the night. At this time, Bev has already prepared a center for the converts to wait out the dawn and calls them out with the sound of a bell. She quotes statements about the Ark, but Pruitt abandons her idea and is unwilling to be the leader of the converts. Bev reports that the boats are burned, while Lisa and Warren mentally say goodbye to their families and get into their canoe. Bev takes command and throws the atheist convert out of the Ark, mocking his desire to save himself with the believers. Monsignor, on the other hand, invites the man to stay in the church, for God loves everyone, regardless of their views, because everyone is worthy of salvation. But once inside the church, John sees Sarah, who is going to burn everything with kerosene and a lighter. He confesses that he is her father and regrets that he didn't get to know her better. But at that moment, one of Bev's underlings shoots Sarah. Enraged, Pruitt attacks him, wanting to kill him, but stops himself in time, remembering who he is and where he is. John tries to save Sarah and lets her drink his blood to turn her into a vampire, but she spits it back out, wanting to die human. John and Mildred mourn their daughter's death. They take her body, burn the church, and leave for the bridge by the river, a memorable place where Sarah often played as a child. Meanwhile, the walls of the rehab center are doused with kerosene by the surviving sheriff. Bev mocks the sheriff's religion and shoots him, and Erin emerges from the building, spilling kerosene inside, but is picked up by a flying vampire, taking her aside and gnawing at her neck. But then Ali picks up the lighter and throws it into the building. Bev takes another shot at the sheriff, but his son rushes to the man and takes him away. Realizing that there are no more places to wait out the dawn, the converts disperse, wanting to spend their last moments with their loved ones. Slowly dying, Erin shreds the wings of the blood-sucking vampire with a knife, after which the vampire struggles to rise into the air. He is spotted by Lisa and Warren, who are watching the shore from the boat, and they note the monster's slow speed and that he is unlikely to make it to the mainland before dawn. Erin dies looking up at the stars and remembering Riley. Bev leaves to meet the dawn on the beach. The wounded sheriff and his son also go to the shore, where together they begin to pray, adhering to their native religion. Monsignor Pruitt and Mildred sit on the bridge holding Sarah's body. The father renounces the church and begs his beloved for forgiveness. Finally, dawn breaks. Ali burns in the sunlight, sitting by his father's dead body. Desperate, Bev tries to dig a shelter in the sand and burns up in hysterics. Riley's parents, in a crowd of similarly converted people, greet the dawn by singing hymns praising the Lord. All the islanders burn, while Pruitt and Mildred kiss against the rising sun. The only survivors, Lisa and Warren, watch the fire. Suddenly, the girl confesses that she can no longer feel her legs. And that's the end of the series. Write in the comments what you think of this series.